It's been a stellar year for Afterpay. How much of the growth of the company has been COVID related?
Look, the company's growth over the last several years and really over FY20 overall has been strong and very consistent. What we've seen with COVID-19 is probably an acceleration of that growth. What was pretty apparent to us early on with the crisis was the massive shift online was a huge driver. But it really added to what was already strong growth momentum. The other probably more interesting dynamic that we see is providing a really strong tailwind is just when we've gone through this environment, the conditions where we started the company around the time of the GFC, or started thinking about it at least, have very much also come to the fore, with customers, moving away from traditional credit, moving away from credit cards, wanting an alternative, not wanting to fall into debt traps, and seeing Afterpay as a budgeting tool and something that they can use, particularly in this environment, in a responsible way.
So those changes, those structural changes more to the online sales, and as you've said, millennials are now looking at buy now, pay later products instead of, traditional credit cards. Do you see those as permanent changes?
I do. We've been seeing the shift online pretty consistently. We've seen that accelerate in the last 5 months, and I do see that as structural. I'd say it's probably accelerated what in normal course terms would be 3 years, and we've seen that come in about 5 months. But I do see a lot of that as being permanent. In terms of the customer mindset, I absolutely see this as a continuation and probably an acceleration of a theme. When you look at millennials, which are the most important economic demographic now in the world, they really came into the workforce at the time when the GFC was full force. And their preference not to fall into debt traps, not wanting, traditional products that lock them into high interest outcomes, etc., has been a driver and a reason why our very customer-centric point of view got so much resonance with customers early on when we launched about 4 or 5 years ago. That mindset during COVID is stronger, right? In times of less economic certainty, those feelings of wanting to be more responsible with your own money really come to the fore. And look, we see that in our results. Over 90% of our customers now globally, over 10 million customers, use debit cards in our system. They want to use their own money, and they want to budget for things in very short duration, but in a way where they don't pay anything extra. And that's been a really important driver of the movement that we see unlocking here.
I think you could say that Afterpay has, it has a bit of a window on consumer confidence and stress. How much stress is there in the system that you're seeing?
Yeah, look, the really interesting thing about our whole approach to Afterpay from the start was, how do you reduce stress in a system that's already stressed? So how do we make our service really customer-centric and focus on things that, traditional credit providers don't? Things like, how do you keep balances really low? The average transaction value with Afterpay is $150. The average balance outstanding is no more than $200. So how do you keep, amounts really low? And how do you keep responsibility at the fore? So, when a customer misses a payment, for example, they can't use the system unless their account is always up to date. Some of these really key dynamics have been all about how do you reduce stress in the system. Obviously, with periods of crisis and pandemics, there's a lot of people that are suffering at the moment. But we feel our service has been really responsive to their needs. Importantly, we felt that really at the onset of the crisis, we could do very proactive things with our system to reduce stress in terms of the way that we approve transactions, set limits, do different things. And what we've seen in our results has actually been an improvement rather than a decline in the things that matter, the outcomes that matter. So from a consumer responsibility perspective, our default rates have actually gotten lower over this period. And I think that's a reflection of the dynamic nature of our system and the core disciplines that are already included in our product. The other thing that we think is really interesting is the fact that while we're new, in the sense that we're only 4 or 5 years old, the customers have stuck with us over this period of time. So frequency and retention in our system is very high. And that also comes with responsibility, because if you have a whole new customer base that you don't know very well, then changing market conditions can have a really big impact. But we've seen a very consistent and improving performance so far, and obviously we'll maintain a cautionary tone, but the results today point in the right direction.
Are you worried about consumer appetite for spending going forward?
Look, we've always, as I said before, come from the perspective that consumers are always going to need to spend. They're going to need to live their life in the normal course. We see generally across the board consumers really wanting to adopt a budgeting mindset where they use their own money. We haven't seen a rapid increase in spending trends in any particular category over the last several months. Obviously, there was a mixed shift when people went into lockdown in different markets across the world, but we haven't seen a radically different pattern emerge in terms of people's limits and use of the system and how they're spending. It's been generally what you'd expect in terms of when you look at what people buy and how frequently they're buying.
You do face a large amount of scrutiny from the community. I think the worry from some in the industry is that there's no accountability at the moment for any potential spikes in consumer debt, particularly for young people. What do you say to that?
It's been the whole reason why we existed in the first place. I think we have a unique system that actually puts responsibility to the forefront. I think scrutiny is very good. I think when new players come to market and new industries emerge, engagement and communication is really important. And we would hold ourselves out to be a company that's open to all views in the market, particularly as we get larger. I think the discussion and the debate, frankly, should be about outcomes. What customer outcomes are we actually generating, and how do we compare, for example, to more traditional or incumbent players in the market? Because we built our system to be customer-centric, the very good illustration I think that we can make as a company is the results that we're driving. So, one of the measures of responsibility comes around customer default rates. It's a key measure that tracks how you're going and how you're treating customers. And we're very proud of the fact that we've got the lowest default rates probably of any traditional, compared to any traditional player or newer player in the market. And looking at those outcomes and what gets engendered from, what is a different model that we've employed in the market, we think is a really, really important discussion. But we're open to participating in a very transparent and a proactive way. Things like being a leader in an industry code is something that we've been doing in a very determined way in the last several months. But to your point, I'd also say that, Afterpay is regulated. The intervention powers that ASIC was granted, last year, we were an advocate for, and we think are important. So for us, it's not that regulation isn't important. We think, to the contrary, it is very important. The discussion should just be what is fit for purpose and what customer outcomes are you actually driving. So it's important that we continue to communicate with all stakeholders around the topic.
And ASIC is handing down its findings into the Buy Now, Pay Later inquiry, I believe, in October. How would life change for Afterpay if that were to be further regulated?
We'll see what ASIC produces, and obviously we've been interacting with them as they've done this report, as well as, as they've been producing their last report. Regulation for us doesn't necessarily mean anything negative from how our product works or how it's serviced. We've never taken an anti-regulation point of view. The key thing for Afterpay, but also various other players in the market, is that what customer outcomes, again, are coming from our service, and how do we promote responsibility as a larger network of new players in the industry that's offering very valuable, I think, competition and customer choice. The whole reason why our customers stick with us is that they think we're a better alternative to the options that they've had previously. And that has to be matched with the proper amount of responsibility and the proper amount of outcome. So as a company and as an industry, you should always be proactive to do more and looking at more ways to protect consumer against harms. But we feel that we're coming from a good place with the results that we're driving to date. But again, we think that should be the focus.
Moving to your expansionary efforts at the moment, you now have a footprint in the US, Southern Europe, as of today, Canada and Indonesia. How soon will it be before your international presence kind of outdoes your Australian presence?
Yeah, look, we've been growing in the US very strongly in the last 2 years. We now have, well over 5 million customers in the US, well over 1 million customers in the UK. The UK is only 1 year old or a little bit older. We're certainly accelerating in international markets faster than we did so in Australia. But what I would say is that, Australia still represents probably an excellent blueprint for the way that we see the markets internationally developing. Because Australia and New Zealand are our most mature markets, what we've seen from our performance is that over time, our relationship with customers gets more entrenched, it gets better, and the financial performance of our business gets better with that positive relationship with customers. So, what's been very important to us is, yes, expansion overseas is a core pillar of our strategy, but it's not growth for growth's sake. It's about having those right ecosystem dynamics come through with customers enjoying our service and being repeat users and having default rates remain very low in the system as we promote responsibility as being the core element of our service. So we do see the international markets growing much stronger probably than Australia in the future, just by virtue of their size. But Australia and New Zealand still represents a very good blueprint for us.
Just lastly, I know we're running out of time. One of your major shareholders is China's Tencent. What is Tencent saying to you about Australia's relationship with China?
Look, our relationship with Tencent has been purely about what they see as Afterpay in our model. And, what they saw as being something that was new in the marketplace, that was very customer-centric, a model that promotes customer responsibility in a new way and our alignment with customers. And it was really on that basis that I believe that they were interested in us as a company, as a normal shareholder, as well as everybody else's. Our discussions have been really about their global network and relationships and what they see throughout their investment universe, which is well beyond China. So it really is just about, how do those relationships and networks can or possibly could help Afterpay in the future, but it's based very much on what they saw with us to be a global opportunity and not regionally specific.
And what about you, Anthony? How do you see Australia's relationship with China? Is China somewhere that you would consider, expanding the business?
Look, from our perspective, we look at all of the opportunities really based on, how our service can really play to what is a new generation of customers globally. We've always taken a measured approach to our expansion. the reason why our confidence, for example, has become greater with the US, now going from US to Canada, and Europe, going from UK to continental Europe, was based on the fact that we've seen customers respond to our service in a really appropriate and good way, similar to what we saw in Australia and New Zealand. You know, if we expand further into other regions, and we did announce, you know, some small steps in terms of forming a team in Asia with our results today, it'll be about looking at those same dynamics and how we can add value to customers and retailers globally. Our expansion has also been buoyed by what our retail partners believe we can do for their businesses, whereas also where the journey has to start. The reason we've been so successful in the US and the UK so far is because these key global retail relationships wanted us to move with them where they're present. So we're going to follow that seam, and where that takes us to in new regions will be a product of that. But we think that there are multiple global markets that will lend itself to the Afterpay service because of these core consumer dynamics and retail dynamics we're seeing across the world.
Anthony Eisen, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for yours. Appreciate it.